Roman Audibrook Whispers on the Waves, Part 2. Chapter 5, Tides of Truth. Avery Lawson stood behind the counter of Tide and Tart, her hands trembling as she poured coffee for a tourist, the morning sun slicing through the bakery's windows. The scent of fresh blueberry muffins filled the air, but it couldn't mask the panic clawing at her chest. The landlord's text from last night, "Rent's due, no extensions," was a storm cloud, and the broken oven, barely limping along after Finn's temporary fix, was a ticking bomb. Outside, Cliffhaven's harbor sparkled, the waves whispering against the docks, but all Avery could hear was the echo of her own failure. The lighthouse petition was stalling, and now her bakery, her last tether to Nora, was slipping away. Finn Harbor's footsteps thudded down the back stairs, and she braced herself. He'd been a quiet help since the council meeting 2 days ago, fixing the oven, handing out flyers, his steady presence a buoy in her chaos. But their almost moment outside the town hall, his hand on her arm, had left her reeling. She didn't want to need him, not when her heart was still scarred from loss, not when he could leave any day for his seal research. "Morning," Finn said, stepping into the bakery, his dark hair damp from a shower, his t-shirt clinging to his frame. He carried a rolled-up poster, and his blue eyes flicked to her with a mix of concern and warmth. "You look like you need this more than I do." He slid a coffee mug across the counter, the steam curling like sea mist. Avery managed a half-smile, taking the mug. "Thanks. But unless that's a magic fix for my oven, it's not enough." He leaned against the counter, his grin softening the room's edges. "Oven still holding. I checked it earlier. You're tougher than you think, Avery." Her throat tightened at his words, and she turned away, busying herself with wiping the counter. Tough? She'd been driving the night Nora died, distracted by a stupid argument about music. The crash wasn't her fault, the police said, but guilt was a tide that never receded. She couldn't tell Finn that, not when his own past, his failed project, the people hurt, already weighed on him. Before she could respond, the bell jingled, and Mrs. Pritchard swept in, her shawl a riot of turquoise. "Avery, Finn, we've got trouble." She slapped a newspaper on the counter, its headline screaming, "Developer offers millions for lighthouse land." Avery's stomach plummeted. "Millions?" she whispered, scanning the article. The Portland firm had doubled their bid, and Councilman Reed was quoted praising economic growth. Finn frowned, reading over her shoulder. "They're playing dirty. We need more signatures, maybe a rally." Mrs. Pritchard nodded. "Exactly. Avery, host a fundraiser here. Muffins, coffee, save the lighthouse vibes. Finn, you're our secret weapon, talk up those seals. Tourists love that eco stuff." Avery's head spun. A fundraiser sounded impossible with a failing oven and rent looming. But Finn's hand brushed hers as he took the newspaper, a fleeting warmth that steadied her. "We can do this," he said, his voice low. Together. The word, together, was a lifeline, but it terrified her. She nodded, swallowing hard, and Mrs. Pritchard bustled out, muttering about posters. As the morning rush picked up, Finn stayed, pouring coffee and charming customers with stories of harbor seals. His laugh filled the bakery, and Avery caught herself watching him, the way his eyes crinkled, the way he made her feel less alone. But when a customer left behind a newspaper, she froze. Tucked inside was a photo from 2 years ago, the wreckage of her car, Nora's name in the caption. Her hands shook, and Finn noticed, setting down a tray. "Avery? What's wrong?" She shoved the paper under the counter, her voice sharp. "Nothing. Just old news." He stepped closer, his brow furrowed. "That was about your sister, wasn't it? The one you mentioned at the lighthouse." Her chest tightened, the truth clawing its way out. "I was driving," she blurted, her voice breaking. "The night she died. I was arguing with her, and I didn't see the truck. They said it wasn't my fault, but..." She stopped, tears burning her eyes. Finn's face softened, but there was a flicker of something else, shock, maybe, or recognition. "Avery, I'm so sorry," he said, reaching for her hand. She pulled away, fear spiking. "Don't. I don't need pity. And I don't need you digging into my past. I'm not," he said, his voice steady. "But I know what it's like to carry blame. You don't have to do it alone." His words were too much, too close, and she turned to the oven, pretending to check it. The bell jingled with new customers, but her mind was stuck on his expression. Had he known about the crash? Had he looked her up? The thought made her stomach churn. As the day wore on, Finn stayed, but the air between them was heavy, like a storm rolling in. When Mrs. Pritchard returned with news that the council was leaning toward the developers, Avery's resolve cracked. The lighthouse, the bakery, her trust in Finn, it was all slipping through her fingers, and she wasn't sure she could hold on. Chapter 6. Cresting Waves. Avery Lawson stood in the center of Tide and Tart, the bakery buzzing with the chaos of the lighthouse fundraiser. Fairy lights twinkled along the driftwood shelves, and the air was thick with the scent of cinnamon rolls and brewing coffee. Outside, Cliffhaven's harbor glowed under a dusky sky, the waves crashing with a restless rhythm. Locals and tourists crowded the tables, signing petitions and dropping coins into a donation jar, while Mrs. Pritchard worked the room like a carnival barker, her turquoise shawl fluttering. The fundraiser was a last-ditch effort to sway the council against the developers, and it was working, barely. But Avery's heart was a knot, tangled with the weight of her rent deadline, the faltering oven, and Finn Harbor. Finn moved through the crowd, his navy shirt rolled up to his elbows, handing out flyers with a grin that charmed even the grumpiest fisherman. Since her confession about Nora yesterday, he'd been careful, his glances softer, his teasing lighter. But the distance she'd put between them, her sharp words, her fear he'd dug into her past, hung like fog. She wanted to trust him, to lean into the warmth of his presence, but the thought of losing him, like she'd lost Nora, was a riptide pulling her under. "Avery," Mrs. Pritchard's voice cut through, waving her over. "We're at 500 signatures. Keep those muffins coming." Avery nodded, forcing a smile as she grabbed a tray from the counter. The oven had held up, thanks to Finn's patch, but every creak felt like a warning. She wove through the crowd, dodging Mr. Callahan's booming laugh, when Finn caught her eye, gesturing her to a quiet corner by the window. "Got a second?" he asked, his voice low, almost drowned by the chatter. His expression was tight, not his usual easy grin, and her stomach twisted. "Sure," she said, setting the tray down. "What's up?" He rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit she'd noticed. "I got a call today. From the Research Institute. They're offering a grant, big one. To study seals in Newfoundland. 6 months, maybe a year." Avery's breath caught, the room tilting. Newfoundland. Across the ocean. The word was a wave, crashing over her hopes. "When do you have to decide?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "By tomorrow," he said, his eyes searching hers. "It's a chance to fix what I broke last year, to do something right." "But," he hesitated, stepping closer, the space between them charged. "I don't want to leave you in the middle of this." Her chest ached, torn between the girl who'd lost everything and the woman who felt alive with him. "You should take it," she said, the words bitter on her tongue. "It's your dream." Finn's jaw tightened. "Avery, it's not that simple. This place, it's starting to feel like home." The confession stole her air, and she looked away, the harbor's lights blurring through unshed tears. She wanted to believe him, to hold on to the spark they'd built, but fear was louder. Before she could speak, Mrs. Pritchard's shout rang out. "Avery!" The oven's smoking, panic surged, and Avery bolted to the kitchen, Finn on her heels. Smoke curled from the oven's seams, and a tray of muffins was charred black. She yanked the door open, coughing as Finn grabbed a towel, fanning the haze. The crowd murmured outside, and Mr. Callahan poked his head in, his beard twitching. "Need a fire extinguisher?" "It's fine," Avery snapped, her voice shaking. Finn shut off the gas, his movements calm but quick, and the smoke began to clear. "It's done," she whispered, sinking against the counter. "The oven's dead. I can't afford a new one, not with rent due." Finn knelt beside her, his hand hovering near her shoulder. "You're not giving up," he said, his voice firm. "We'll figure this out. The fundraiser's a hit. Look at that jar." She followed his gaze to the donation jar, overflowing with bills, and a flicker of hope stirred. But his words, Newfoundland, 6 months, drowned it. "You won't be here to figure it out," she said, her voice raw. "You're leaving." His eyes darkened, and he leaned closer, his voice low. "I haven't decided, Avery. I need you to tell me what you want." Her heart pounded, the bakery fading until it was just them, the waves outside echoing her pulse. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. The fear of losing him, of opening her heart only to break again, was too heavy. Before she could answer, Mrs. Pritchard burst in, her shawl flapping. "Avery, the council's here. They want to talk." Finn stood, offering her a hand, his gaze steady but desperate. "This isn't over," he said, his voice a promise. Avery took his hand, her fingers trembling, and followed Mrs. Pritchard into the crowd. But as the council's voices rose, discussing votes and dollars, all she could feel was the tide pulling Finn away, and the terrifying truth that she might not be ready to let him go, or to hold him close. Chapter 7. Anchored Hearts. Avery Lawson stood on the sandy shore of Cliffhaven, the morning sun painting the harbor in shades of gold and rose. The lighthouse loomed on the cliff above, its red stripe gleaming against the white tower, a beacon that had weathered last night's storm. The fundraiser at Tide and Tart had been a triumph, over 1,000 signatures, a donation jar stuffed with enough to repair the oven, and a council vote, swayed by Mrs. Pritchard's relentless charm, to reject the developer's bid. The lighthouse was safe, and a local grant had covered her back rent, giving the bakery a lifeline. But Avery's heart was still adrift, caught in the wake of Finn Harbor's words. "I need you to tell me what you want." He was leaving today. The grant to Newfoundland, a chance to redeem his past, had a deadline, and his duffel bag was probably packed, waiting upstairs. The thought of him gone, his laughter no longer filling her bakery, was a loss she couldn't bear, not after Nora, not after everything. She clutched a seashell in her pocket, its edges worn smooth, and watched the waves lap at her sneakers, their rhythm urging her to be brave. Footsteps crunched behind her, and she turned to see Finn, his navy jacket open to the breeze, his dark hair catching the sunlight. His eyes, blue as the sea, held a question, and the sight of him, steady, real, made her chest ache. "Morning," he said, stopping a few feet away, his voice soft against the gulls' cries. "Heard the council voted. You saved the lighthouse, Avery." "We saved it," she corrected, her voice shaky. "You were there, charming tourists, fixing ovens." He grinned, but it faded fast. "I saw the grant money came through for your rent. Tide and Tart's safe too." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Yeah, but it doesn't feel like enough." Finn stepped closer, the sand shifting under his boots. "What do you mean?" Her heart pounded, the words she'd held back for weeks clawing free. "You're leaving," she said, her voice breaking. "For Newfoundland. And I don't know how to do this without you." His eyes widened, and he closed the distance, his hand brushing her arm, warm against the cool air. "Avery, I told you I haven't decided. I meant it. This place, it's more than a research gig. But I need to know what you're feeling." Tears stung her eyes, and she laughed, a raw sound that carried over the waves. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "I've been carrying Nora's death for 2 years, blaming myself. I pushed everyone away because it was safer. But you make me want to try again. And if you leave, I'm scared I'll lose that." Finn's face softened, and he cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you, Avery. I've loved you since that first morning when you glared at me over a coffee mug. Newfoundland's a dream, but you're my home." The words crashed over her, washing away her fear, and she surged forward, her hands fisting in his jacket. Their lips met, a kiss that tasted of salt and promises, deep and desperate, like the tide claiming the shore. His arms wrapped around her, grounding her, and for the first time since Nora, she felt whole. When they pulled apart, breathless, Avery rested her forehead against his, her laugh mingling with his. "You're staying?" she whispered, needing to hear it again. "I'm staying," he said, kissing her softly. "I'll find research here. Seals aren't going anywhere. But you? I'm not letting you go." A cackle broke the moment, and they turned to see Mrs. Pritchard on the path, her shawl a violent shade of coral. "About time," she called, hands on her hips. "I told you this summer had a spark," Avery groaned, burying her face in Finn's chest, but his chuckle vibrated against her, warm and steady. "Mrs. P, you're relentless," he said, his arm around Avery. "Someone's got to keep you two in line." Mrs. Pritchard winked, then sauntered off, muttering about wedding cakes. Avery looked up at Finn, the lighthouse casting a soft shadow over them. The bakery waited down the shore, its windows glowing with new promise, and the harbor sparkled, alive with possibility. She wasn't just saving a place, she was building a future with him. "Welcome home," she said, her voice a whisper on the waves, and his smile was brighter than the sun. Epilogue. 6 months later, Avery stood behind the counter of Tide and Tart, the bakery alive with the hum of a new oven and the chatter of early spring tourists. The air smelled of lavender scones and fresh coffee, and sunlight streamed through the windows, dancing on the driftwood shelves. A new chalkboard sign hung above, advertising seal spotting breakfast tours, a collaboration with Finn's local research project. The lighthouse, now a protected historic site, drew crowds daily, and Tide and Tart was booked through summer, its tables filled with laughter and clinking mugs. Finn burst through the door, his binoculars swinging, a grin splitting his face. "Morning, boss," he teased, leaning across the counter to steal a kiss. His lips were warm, tasting of sea salt from his dawn survey of the harbor seals. "Boss?" Avery laughed, swatting him with a towel. "You're the one barking orders on those tours," he chuckled, grabbing a scone. "Fair, but you're the one keeping this place afloat. Look at this crowd." She followed his gaze, her heart swelling. The bakery wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, a testament to the community that had rallied for her. Mr. Callahan sat in the corner, arguing with a tourist about lobster traps, while Mrs. Pritchard held court by the donation jar, now collecting for a lighthouse museum. Avery's fingers brushed the seashell in her apron pocket, a habit she hadn't lost. The guilt of Nora's death still lingered, a quiet ache, but it no longer defined her. Finn had helped her see that, through late-night talks on the beach, shared muffins at dawn, and the way he looked at her, like she was the only shore he'd ever need. "Ready for tonight?" Finn asked, his voice dropping, a spark in his eyes. They'd planned a private picnic by the lighthouse, a celebration of their 6 months together, and the ring box she'd found in his jacket last week made her pulse race. "Only if you promise not to serenade me with that guitar," she teased, but her smile betrayed her excitement. "No promises," he said, winking, and pulled her into another kiss, heedless of the customer's amused glances. As Finn headed out to lead his tour, Avery watched him go, the bell jingling above the door. The waves crashed outside, a steady hymn, and the lighthouse stood tall, its beam cutting through the morning mist. Cliffhaven was more than a place now, it was a promise, anchored in love, and she was finally home.